Here we are. Here we are. Man, I love my son's new intro that he put for the show. I have a pullover on because it is freezing in my house right now. It is absolutely freezing. But I want to thank all you for joining us on the Red Pill Diaries. Once again, we'd like to thank you for giving us another hour of your day and some more of your time, because time is the most valuable and most precious commodity and asset that one owns. Well, you don't own it, you just rent it. Because as time passes, you can never get it back. So we hope to give you an equal or greater value for your time that you have spent or is spending with us, okay? Rashid, my co-host, yes, it's Rashid and Rashid. He'll be with us shortly. He's trying to get on now. So let's just go into the news. It's just so much news going on, so much going on. And I was thinking over some of the stuff that is breaking. You know, I was listening to some of the podcasts that are overseas, and then I was reading some of the overseas newspapers. Well, not newspapers, but blog sites. And then I got on RT, and I think it's right here. They must have moved it. I'm just getting on it now. Let's see. Sometimes if you don't get on them right then and there, you'll miss out. But I want to bring something to everybody's attention real quick, okay? Let me just put in Medvedev. Let me see. All right, here we are. See, Medvedev is saying things that I've mentioned on this show for the longest. And he's just brought it up in the escalation between Russia and, I wouldn't really say Ukraine, but between Russia and the United States and NATO in Ukraine. Ukraine is just the battleground. Ukraine is providing the bodies, but the stoking of tensions and the provocations of war is being done by America and the West. So it is more aptly to say that the war is between the United States / NATO and Russia in Ukraine, okay? Now, Medvedev said this. Let me bring this up real quick. This is the headline of the article. He says, Russia could arm North Korea if South sends weapons to Ukraine. Medvedev, stop right there. Haven't we been saying this for the longest on this show? What Russia should do is openly escalate, openly destroy this aura of invincibility and exceptionalism by doing unto America and NATO what they have done so generously to others. We've been saying this for the longest on this platform. Now, it's amazing. Maybe he listens to the platform, and maybe they're now trying to take note of what I'm saying. A bully only knows how to stop, pause, or back up if you confront them in a meaningful way. Now, for so long, it has been the exclusive prerogative of America and NATO to provide weapons, arms, and armaments to nations that they deem their proxies or their servants around the globe. This should no longer be the case because you see where it has gotten us. So if America wants to openly arm the Kurds, Russia should up the arms to Syria. If Israel wants to bomb Syria, Russia should, because Israel is providing weapons to Ukraine, Russia should provide Syria with weapons and put a Russian base close to the occupied area that of the Golan, and staff it with Iranians, Hezbollah, and Syrian forces, and put S-400s, Panzers, and bulk systems there, right? And then in its western flank in Syria, do the same thing. And in its eastern flank, do the same thing. And in the northern flank, do the same thing. And then in the middle of Syria, do the same thing. And immediately upon a missile strike through Lebanon into Syria, Assad should hit Israel back with a double strike. For every destroyed building, we're going to destroy 2 to 3 of yours. For every killed soldier, we're going to kill 10 of yours. For every killed civilian, people say, it's not right to kill civilians. Well, it's not right if Israel kills them. So what makes your civilians more valuable than mine? If you have no respect for the life of my civilians, and they are a part of the Syrian Arab state, then when I hit you back, I can't be concerned about whether Israeli citizens are hit. What's good for the goose, as we say here, has to be good for the gander. When America escalates and announces billion-dollar packages for Ukraine, Russia should immediately announce that they are going to arm Cuba to the teeth. But before they announce it, they have warships already there, warplanes already there, just in case the United States tries to make a move on Cuba. Cuba is between 90 and 100 miles away from the United States. That is further away than Ukraine is from Russia. And America has no problem in putting bases there, biolabs there, doing training there, putting missiles there, drones there, and arming Nazis there. So why should I have any concern about whether or not you agree, whether or not that I'm going to arm the Cuban armed forces and the Cuban government to the teeth? And why should it matter, since you say that every nation has the right to arm itself and every nation has the right to choose its own path, and every nation is a sovereign nation? So Cuba is a sovereign nation, and it's further away from you than Ukraine is from me. If I was Russia, this would be my thinking. So every time you escalate, we will double and triple up on the escalation. And then when you decide to start trouble in Moldova and in Georgia, I will arm Venezuela and Brazil and Argentina. Then I would go into Honduras and offer them a pack, Panama and offer them a pack. So every time you do it, you'll see that you are not the global hegemon or the power that you once thought you were. And if I couldn't do it, my unspoken ally would do it. We would already work this thing out. I'm going to put a base here, but financially, I can't put it here. How about if they escalate more? Because you know if they get me, they're coming after you in Taiwan. So when I do this, we'll escalate it. And we'll escalate and make sure, and every time we escalate, we will point to American arrogance, intransigence, hubris, and hypocrisy. That is the way to make her stop, pause, and think. Okay, if we wage war, if we invade Cuba, there are Russian forces there. They can rebuff us for about a week or two on the Cuban island. And if we go too far, they can launch nuclear missiles. I don't have to place nuclear missiles in Cuba. I can send nuclear-armed submarines and nuclear-armed warships there on a permanent basis. So if you want a Cuban missile crisis in Ukraine, I'm going to put one back on your doorsteps. Because if you're focused on your doorsteps, you're too busy focusing on you and your security instead of focusing on trying to instigate problems and divisions over in my neighborhood. I guarantee you, if you were starting trouble in my neighborhood, in my house, or next door in my brother's house, and I knew that you lived in the county over, and one day I pull up there and I have a bazooka at your door, your focus would not be on my brother's doorstep anymore. Your focus would be trying to make sure that this person in my yard with a bazooka does not first fire it, and second, how do I remove this and how do I stop this from escalating? You're not going to always put the pressure on me. That's not how things work. That's not how things are going to be. If you want to put pressure, I'll put pressure on you. You can't spin into infinity and beyond anymore. The debt is too much of a burden on you, and the whole world knows it. And with people leaving the dollar, and with people working trade deals outside of the SWIFT system, you are no longer the city that sits on a hill. So the more pressure I bring to you, the more economic stress it puts on that weight-bearing load of the colonial West. So Medvedev says, and this is the article from RT, it says, the headline is, Russia could arm North Korea if South sends weapons to Ukraine, Medvedev said. The former president responded to Seoul's suggestion that it could send lethal aid to Kyiv. This should not be a suggestion. This should be an action. What does North Korea lack? Well, they lack, according to the West, robust air defense systems. Okay. Now, if I give them robust air defense systems, how can America think that she's going to bomb North Korea if war breaks out with impunity? So what I would do, I would go with my ally, the unspoken military alliance partner, China, and I say, China, listen, I'm about to send a few Panzer systems, maybe about 3 or 4 Panzer systems, and about 1 or 2 bulk systems up in there. It's not much. But if they escalate after that, then I want you to send your versions of them there too in a boatload. You can afford it. And this will cement our friendship and our ties. And I will back you to the hill if war breaks out in Taiwan or the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea. So I'll give as just as good as I get, right? And this would put so much pressure on the empire that she would have to rethink a lot of her policies, because remember, she may still be the preeminent military power globally, but in certain areas she's not. In Asia, she is not the preeminent power. That's China. In Eurasia, she's not the preeminent power. That's Russia. In Europe, or in Eurasia, China and Russia, excuse me. But in Europe, that's Russia. So now, if you buck up against me, you have to deal with both of us. And this is a task that you cannot do. Because we don't even have to fight a shooting war with you. I can halt all commodity sales, all resource sales, and divert them to China. China can halt all shipping and divert them to Russia and the satellite nations around and all of the global South. This would destroy the U.S. economy. This would destroy the European economy. This would set ablaze the so-called rules-based order. Right? So if you I would just be blunt about it. Stop playing around. Stop being indirect and be very vocal. And by the time I announce it, like what Medvedev said Russia could do, they would already be in there. That's what America does. We are thinking about arming Ukraine with the ATACMS. ATACMS was already there. We are the other systems, the anti-tank system, the TOW system, they were already there. The Patriot, they were already there. All of this stuff that she said she was deliberating on had already been put there. So when I deliberate on it, it's going to already be there. When I publicly deliberate on it, it'll already be there. So when I announce that we are now opening up 2 military bases on the island of Cuba, we would already be there in full strength. And when I openly state that, I would have a military base in Venezuela, Honduras, and in Panama to back up the base in Cuba. So if there's a conflict there, it would not just be those 2 bases. You understand? This is what America does. Before she acted in Ukraine, she had already acted in Kyrgyzstan, right? Kazakhstan, Georgia, right? Tajikistan, all of these color revolutions in the influx of terror. Afghanistan, she's acted in Pakistan, right? And all of the surrounding areas. So why shouldn't I do that? As thou hast done, so shall it be done unto thee. Do unto others as thou would do, as I would have them do unto thee. So since America is this Bible-thumping Christian nation, we'll feed it with biblical scriptures. And we'll live up to the word of Jesus. Right? And we'll see just how long that she can take that. It goes and says this. The former president responded to Seoul's suggestion that it could send lethal aid to Kiev. Moscow could offer advanced weapons to North Korea if South Korea begins to supply military aid to Ukraine, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has suggested. Now stop right there. If this is the case, then that does away with the little lies that the West has spread. Russia is receiving armament and missiles and ammunition from North Korea. That does away with that lie, right? If Russia is telling you that if you do this, we're going up there, we're going to arm North Korea. So that means that Russia doesn't need the armament of North Korea. And Russia didn't receive the armament of North Korea. You see, all of this shows you the lies and the depths of corruption and insanity of the Western world, the Western press, the Western military alliance, all of that. Let's go further. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol indicated a possible policy shift regarding the Ukraine conflict in an interview with Reuters on Wednesday ahead of a state visit to the U.S. next week. If there is a situation the international community cannot condone, such as any large-scale attack on civilians, massacre, or serious violation of the laws of war, it might be difficult for us to insist not only on humanitarian or financial support. Stop right there. That statement was written by the U.S. That statement was written by the U.S. We must realize that the South Korean president has no power, no real power, no real military power, no real political power or clout outside of the United States. They are still an occupied part of the Korean nation that was partitioned by the United States. She tried to do the same thing in Vietnam when she had a North and a South Vietnam. The same thing. The Vietnam War, the Korean War has been over 50, 60 years, and look who's still there with multiple bases. Not one base, not two bases, not three bases, but over a dozen. Some reports say over 24 military bases. And South Korea is a little bit smaller than the size of the state of Alabama or the state of Mississippi. She has more military bases in South Korea than she does in Alabama or Mississippi. That's crazy, isn't it? When you look at the things from that perspective, right? If you look at Japan, 75% of the island of Okinawa is military bases. 75% of the Okinawa prefecture is occupied by the United States. There are other military bases. Some reports say that the United States, with her facilities and her ammo dumps and all of this stuff, have over 2,000 bases around Japan. And Japan is slightly the size of California, I believe, slightly a little bit smaller than the size of California, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. She has more bases in Japan than she does in California. It's crazy. This is crazy. This is what empires do. They occupy, they bully, they stoke tensions, they steal, they rob, they maim, they kill, and they take whatever they want. And if you are an obstacle in the way of what they want, they remove you or try to remove you. And they give it to their prostitutes, which are the modern day scribes, the media, to justify every move that America makes, and by inundating the Western people with a steady feed of propaganda to weaken their resistance to what the empire is trying to do. It's crazy, isn't it? But this is the reality of what's going on. Okay, let's read a little bit further. All right. It says, considering our relationship with the parties engaged in the war and development in the battlefield, we will take the most appropriate measures, he said. He added. Medvedev, who currently serves as the deputy chair of the Russian National Security Council, noted that Seoul has thus far refused to supply lethal aid to Kiev. Now, we know when they start saying stuff as with the Korean president, it's because of pressure and political prep by the U.S. on the leadership, right? We know that. This is a steady stream of that, right? No matter whether you look where you look in the world, whenever America has a line, later on, all of her nations that she occupy, all of the leaders usually fall in line, or some kind of protest or political situation happens within the country, right? So let's go further. It says, I wonder what the residents of this nation would say when they see the newest example of Russian weapons in possession of their closest neighbors, our partners from the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Medvedev wrote on social media. Now, he goes and says, Yoon told reporters that he plans to discuss with the U.S. President Joe Biden how the two nations can achieve tangible outcomes in deterring North Korea. Now, if he is saying this and he's on his trip to America, remember what the Georgian president said when the Georgian president had arrived in Washington, D.C. and was being debriefed by their handlers in Washington? And they started talking about that they're in agreement with the protesters, and that the the bill for registering foreign funding of politicians and institutions, they were against that, and they were egging on the protesters back home in Tbilisi in Georgia. Remember that? Huh? So we see that on a daily basis, right? Man, I see something just fell off here. Oh, man. Hold on 1 second. Okay, I got it. Anyway, that was a microphone, and my microphone moved over a little bit. But anyway, we see that now with Yoon on a trip to the U.S. The same playbook. Look, man, you guys have got to do more than just be vassals for propaganda. You guys have got to start thinking and start applying. Listen, mathematics is this. You take your multiplier times your multiplicand, and then you come up with a product. That involves work. That involves action, right? The only way you can solve the problem is by taking one, multiplying it by the other, and coming up with an answer. The same thing, you take what we know is a pattern, and we take what we know is history and what is real. Then we use that as a base or a guide to come up with logical and rational conclusions. So you're not out of pocket saying that he may be just repeating or regurgitating what his U.S. handlers are telling him, because he's under tremendous pressure. But he also has a national public that he has to deal with also. So that's why he was skating and skirting the lines, okay? Now, I'm telling you, man, this thing is getting very, 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 very serious. I want to go to something real quick, okay? I want to go to something. This is something that has everything to do with Russia has been saying. When Russia find all these biolabs, and it has everything to do with the funding. America is making bio weapons and chemical weapons, and she's making genetic specific weapons. This was also what the Israelis were doing, and probably still are. The UN doesn't report it, but I want you to listen to this, because when a person is building up their arsenal, constantly provoking, constantly deploying, constantly threatening, and constantly beating their chest by launching their Minuteman weapons and saying what they'll do, and then you find out that they have genetic specific weaponry that they're working on, and they have biolabs all across Africa, all across Asia, and these are and they want you to believe that they're not testing these. these things. And then we have these breakouts, these quote unquote unknown breakouts of tuberculosis, polio, right? The plague, and all of this stuff, Ebola, and you know that other virus that cannot be spoken. All of these things break out, and then we find out that there are U.S. companies that have patents on them, and then we find out that they were doing testing, but nothing leaked out though. It just so happens that a coincidence that the same kind of virus or the same kind of a bioweapon that you were using infected the Congo or infected China or infected. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the reason she's doubling and tripling down on this, even after being found out about it, is because her dollar is collapsing. Her international order is collapsing. Her influence is collapsing. And her military prowess is under intense and tremendous pressure by emerging and re-emerging powers. So this has everything to do with militarily, economically, politically, and geopolitically. I want you to listen closely to this, okay?
Well, joining us now from Normandy, we have geopolitical analyst Jeff Brown. Mr. Brown, first of all, what do you think about the recent comments coming from China with regards to the United States requiring basically Washington to clarify its military biological activities at home and abroad?
The one good thing about, by the way, thank you for having me on. The one good thing about the Russia-NATO war in Ukraine is that it has exposed it's like ripped a scab off of the gigantic wound of American bioweapon production around the world, and this is something that's very, very important to me. I helped found the Bioweapon Truth Commission in 2018, and I'm the curator of its online library, which is free for everyone. So anybody that wants to know about the history of all this, just go to www.bioweapontruth.com, and it goes all the way back to the chemical warfare of France and Britain in World War I, the chemical warfare against the Iran during the Iranian War, biological weapons used during the Korean War, in Vietnam. It has been non-stop, and the United States just denies. They have so many other countries that they have implicated into it. And unfortunately, the bioweapon and the Bioweapon Toxin Convention that the United States and Russia created back in the 1970s just does not have any teeth for enforcement. So as long as the United States denies it and refuses to admit to any kind of an investigation, they're keeping on doing it all over the world. 330 bioweapon laboratory production centers all over the world, and most of them are around the United States and NATO's enemies: China, Iran, in Africa, Ukraine, etc. So this is a problem that's been going on since World War I.
Mr. Brown, the Chinese foreign minister also slammed Washington's double standard approach to the issue of military biological activities. He said that the rest of the world would not accept such double standards. Can you explain for us this hypocrisy that we're seeing with regards to this issue from Washington?
Again, Russia has exposed tens of thousands of pages of evidence that they have uncovered in Ukraine. The biologic, which I've all uploaded onto the global online library at bioweapontruth.com, but the problem is that just like in the UN, just like in every other international organization, the United States is the bully, is the global bully, the global globocop, and they just push their weight around. They can get away with it. Nobody in France and nobody in Europe is going to say anything. And again, with the bioweapon and toxin convention being admirable about trying to control bioweapons, there is literally nothing the world can do about it as long as the United States just flagrantly violates the well, these are war crimes. These are war crimes. These are crimes against humanity. And the Russians just came out this week saying we now have evidence that they are still going back into Ukraine, and they're still going into the western part of Ukraine now that all the labs in the eastern part that Russia has taken over to investigate. They're now still doing bioweapon production in western Ukraine. So it's out of control. It's completely out of control. It's like a madman. It's like a madman, at the helm.
Let's go back to something because I need to point out something. Remember what the South Korean president said and would be his justification in sending weapons to Ukraine. He said that okay, let's scroll up a minute because I got to go to the definitions of a few things, okay? So I want to go back. He said, if there is a situation, the international community, remember that part, the international community cannot condone, such as any large-scale attacks on civilians, remember that part, massacre, or serious, listen to this most important part, serious violation of laws of war, it might be difficult for us to insist only on humanitarian or financial support. Remember that part. Now, let's go to the meaning of war crimes, okay? According to the dictionary, war crimes, an action carried out during the conduct of a war that violates accepted international rules of war. So by depositing biological and chemical weapons laboratories across every area of a perceived enemy or someone who is trying to buck from your authority or your sphere of influence, and then you leak these things out or you use them as a threat, that is a violation of what? International norms. It's a violation of what? The international rules of war. So if South Korea is to be believed, then they should be helping to supply Russia with weapons against America and NATO, because these are biological labs owned by America. They have Western patents in there. Do you understand? So we have to look at these things for what they are. I told you definitions go a long, long way. Now watch other people start having platforms, and they'll start doing this also. And they'll become bigger, but you'll know where it started from. Now let's go further. All right, because the guy mentioned crimes against humanity, what America is doing, what Britain is doing, what the West are collectively carrying out, are crimes against humanity. I remember a while ago, years ago, when the war took place in Libya. After I interviewed the Honorable former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney a couple times, and she was talking about the depleted uranium that the U.S. uses in these wars in Iraq and in Libya and stuff like that. Those are crimes against humanity. Those are war crimes. They poison the soil. They destroy agriculture. They cause cancer and all other kinds of diseases. They have birth effects. These things go into the future, not just from when it happens. It goes on in perpetuity for as far as the eye can see in time. Crimes against humanity. A deliberate act. Now, what did Britain say? We are going to supply Ukraine Challenger 2 tanks that have a coating of what? Depleted uranium. And we're going to supply them with what? Depleted uranium rounds. And they have done studies showing you that all depleted uranium rounds, they contaminate the soil, and people breathe in the dust from these things, and they get cancer and all kinds of other diseases. So if Britain openly announced that, and the West is silently backing it and probably doing the same, what do we classify that as? Because they're not doing it for peace, because they said that the time is not right for negotiations. And when Russia offered negotiations, what did America say? As if America is right next to Russia. Ukraine will not accept these terms. Hell, you're not Ukraine. This shows you who's pulling the strings. So listen to the definition. A deliberate, not an accidental, not a mistake, but a deliberate act, typically as part of a systematic campaign. Oh man, we got to come back to that part. That causes human suffering or death on a large scale. Stop right there. Remember, there's all kind of signs that point towards that this war was being provoked and being prepared by the United States and the West for well over a decade. And we know that the Ukrainians have lost between 200,000 and 400,000 troops, and tens of thousands of civilians, and thousands of square miles in territory. And this is on the back of them flagrantly and arrogantly brushing aside all of Russia's security concerns. And then they openly came out and said, we want Russia to bleed. We've been planning this. Let's go back to war crimes, crimes against humanity. A deliberate, not an accidental, but a deliberate. When a person tells you that they're going to do something, then you see them do it later, that is not an accident. That is on purpose, right? A deliberate act, typically as part of a systematic campaign. Look what the U.S. has been doing. They bombed Yugoslavia. They balkanized Yugoslavia so that Russia would not have that ally. Then they turned these various enclaves that used to be part of Yugoslavia into NATO allies. And then they put in campaigns, propaganda campaigns, to turn them against Russia. That's deliberate, right? And that's systematic. Is that not right? They went gobbling up all of the former Soviet Union, most of anyhow, to become part of an alliance that should have been defunct after the fall of the Soviet Union. This alliance has gone across the world, trampling over sovereignty, international law, and the will of the people to further imperialistic goals and plans. That's systematic. They have used sanctions as a systematic way to try to punish people who does not submit to their policies or their threats or their dictates, right? It is a campaign. A campaign is not something that's done once. It is something that is put in motion and that is done over and over and over again. So you are campaigning. You don't just say, I'm going to run for president and then just go in your house and close the door. No, you get out there and you make motion towards that, right? That is what they have done towards war with Russia. They have been making motion towards war with Russia. That's how you make time. Time is motion. If your watch stops and someone asks you time, you say, my watch is dead. Why? Because there's no motion, so you can't measure time. But we know that they have been making time towards Russia because we see the motion from the collapse of the Soviet Union up into the war in Ukraine. We can measure the distance of time. Right? Okay. So listen, it says a deliberate act typically of a systematic campaign that causes human suffering or death on a large scale. Since 2014, what have they been doing to the Donbass? Systematically killing civilians, right? Not including what they've been doing on the continent of Africa. Right now, we're specifically talking about this, making a case for war crimes right there. This has been deliberate, this has been systematic, and it's been a campaign that has caused untold human suffering and death on a large scale. So you can hold them for war crimes and crimes against humanity on that alone. All right? Is that not right? That's right. Now, if we look to Africa, they've been doing it for centuries, raping and pillaging and robbing. What happened on Leopold? King Leopold had 60 million, I believe, Congolese, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that was the Congo. Had him killed because he had a bad day. And you talk about Hitler. When we look at the mass murder of these people who have been in power for the longest, and the thing about it is, it's not getting better. It's getting more sophisticated. So when you look at, and they show the pictures of the drug dealers in the inner city, how are the drugs getting to the inner city when the inner city has no planes, buses, trains, submarines, boats, ports, airports, or controlled borders or satellites? It is a campaign, a concerted effort. These are crimes against humanity in the urban city. See, what we're doing, we're laying the case out for Western leaders to be brought before a court of justice and be held accountable, because for so many centuries, they have not been held accountable because they had the power. And he who holds the power controls the courts. But we're not in the court of law that is governed by them. We're going to be in the court of public opinion and the court of divine, because you can escape the average person's judgment, but you won't escape the divine judgment of Almighty God. That's something you can't get past. If you're born into this creation, then you got to be judged by the creator of the creation. You understand? So you may look good. That's why you see these U.S. presidents living so long. But them living so long, their health starts failing and they start becoming senile and all. This is chastisement for the hell that they put on other people. You don't just get to kill and destroy nations and then don't think that it's coming back on you, that the blood of the people who you shed is not coming back on you. That's not how the way the universe was created. And so they continue to do so, thinking that they are the exceptions to the rules. But we see that all of that is being taken away from, and this is why there's such a clamor for the U.S. to sanction nations and to wage war with nations and to overthrow. If they can't take Russia out, see, they look, this is what they do. If we can't just confront Russia head to head, or if we can't confront China right now head to head, what we'll do, we'll play chess. Russia does a lot of trading with these smaller nations. They don't have any bases there. So what we'll do, we'll pretend to be friends and want to trade with them, and then we'll send covert ops up in there, stoke tensions, find out who's dissatisfied, who's corrupt, who want to rule, who wants power, and then we'll nurture that, and we'll control it, and we'll have controlled chaos to overthrow, destabilize, or uproot the government. And then we can put in who we want and turn them against Russia one by one, against China one by one, against Iran one by one, so that we can have them hemmed in. And if we can have them hemmed in and we have control of these nations' governments, we have control over their currency, we have control over their trade, we have control over their military, we have control over the politics, we have control over their food, we have control over them. So it weakens Russia, it weakens Iran, it weakens China. That's why they broke up Yugoslavia. That's why they're putting pressure on Orban in Hungary. That's why they are trying to stoke tensions in Georgia. That's why they're trying to stoke tensions in Moldova. That's why they have tricolor revolution in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. That's why they went into Afghanistan, because it was Russia, India, China, and Pakistan, and Iran's underbelly. These are plays out of the old imperial playbook. And the reason that they're doing this is because they're losing economic competitiveness. They are losing their position perched up on the tower. And they are not the exception no more. Right now, they are falling into a group of peers. And that is something that is unacceptable. by the powers that be that run the Western world. Let's listen to what this guy has to say about America losing her economic competitiveness, okay?
Well, because it's losing in peaceful economic competition. The United States claims its economy is dynamic, etc., but the real reality is that it's losing in the competition to China. I mean, if we take the situation in the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, in the 3 years of the pandemic, China's economy grew 2.5 times as fast as the United States. China grew over 13%, the US just over 5%. If you take the addition to world GDP in this period, it's 36% to China and about 16% to the United States. Then if you look at the individual companies, the US can't compete in telecommunications with Huawei. TikTok has become the most popular, so therefore the US is trying to ban Huawei. TikTok has become the most visited website in the world, so the US is now considering banning TikTok. Hikvision is the best producer of cameras for surveillance, etc. I mean, for safety surveillance in the world. So the US can't compete with that. The US admits that the whole solar power industry is totally dominated by China. The US is losing in peaceful economic competition. The only place in which it maintains a lead is military, because it spends more than the next 9 countries in the world put together. So therefore increasingly tends to try to put things on a military terrain. And this is very, very dangerous, because the world wants to get on with peaceful development, but the US wants to move things more and more towards military actions.
So when you lose your economic edge, your trade edge, your technological edge, your political edge, and the only thing that you have an edge on in certain areas is your military, guess what you do? You provoke war. You provoke tensions. You destabilize areas to try to preoccupy those people whom you deem as your greatest rival, so that you can destabilize their trade, their stability, so that they would have to spend more money to put out these brush fires that you continue to light on their doorsteps. And that gives you a little reprieve each time, right? And we see that China is out competing America at every step. Huawei, because it became the #1 brand, Huawei. And because it even overtook Samsung, the South Korean brand. America came up with security issues. Now we look at TikTok, the same thing. Everything they always use, it's a national security threat. They do that when they can't compete anymore. Hell, if that's the case, every nation on earth should ban all of your stuff, or anything that you allow to go out, like through Samsung, because you can halt Samsung by sanctioning South Korea. You can do, you have the ultimate say over some of the stuff that they do, because they're still a colony. So if everybody did what you did, then no goods would be transported. But the crazy thing about this is, you rely 93% of all your goods. You rely so much on China that 93% of your goods come from it. But the problem here is, this was not just the American government move on Huawei or the solar industry or China's big tech industry with TikTok. This was influenced by Google, by Facebook. All of these big Western dominated platforms saw that they were losing the tech battle. They're trying to play innocent now, but remember that they were in the pockets, and some of them had seed funds from the CIA and all of these ABC and intelligence agencies to thrive and to bloom and to blossom. A lot of them had their beginning with the CIA and all of these other ABC intelligence agencies. So as TikTok and Huawei became big, it became a threat, because it unseated American and Western tech firms as being the #1 in the world. This is another thing. And if you go and look it up, 5 of the top 6 banks in the world are Chinese now. Go look it up. And that's why Trump wanted to sanction the Chinese banking system, because they see they're losing their competitive edge. So they use this trumped up a national security threat to justify them either banning or stealing outright the companies. But if this were to happen in reverse, if China were to do this to American companies, or if Russia did this to American companies, or Iran did it, or Venezuela did it to American companies, or South Africa did it to American companies, or Western companies, this would be unacceptable, right? And the oligarchs are stealing. They have no respect for the rule of law, right? But because it's America and the Western tech giants that's pushing this, the media is silent on it. It falls silent on all of this. The reason is they can't compete. When you have a level playing field and America is not able to interject billions of dollars that can't be matched by others, and when America can't sanction everything Chinese because they know they need things from China. When they can't do that, they don't know what to do. So now they got to go to the last level or the last thing, the last trick up their sleeve, national security. Don't they use that to get money, fleece the people? We need 800 billion. Why? While 150 million people in America or more suffering. They're suffering. Can't pay their mortgage, can't pay their rent, can't pay their bills, have to choose between eating a meal or paying for medicine. And they continue to fleece the people. You don't have no say in this. They take it out of your check. You have no say. And if you refuse to give it to them, they'll put you in jail. So you involuntarily fund the military-industrial complex. That's what happens. You do not see that this system is screwed up? And America is becoming more desperate by the hour. As a matter of fact, look what is taking place right now on the international scale. I'm going to play you a couple short videos. I want you to see what's going on. And this is why they're focusing on China and Russia, but specifically China, because they're losing economic relevance and dominance to the Chinese, a non-white, non-Western nation, okay?
Amid Trump's predictions on the dollar's decay, China and Malaysia are about to start talks on establishing an Asian monetary fund, according to Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. That's as the states look to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar in bilateral trade.
There is no reason for a country like Malaysia to continue relying on the US dollar in attracting investments into the country. At the Boao Forum in Hainan, I openly proposed the idea of the Asian Monetary Fund because we only rely on the dollar or on the IMF.
According to the PM, the two states' national currencies may now be used in trade negotiations. He also discussed a record $39 billion package that China is set to invest in Malaysia. There have been previous discussions on the establishment of an Asian monetary fund, which struggled to take off due to the strength of the U.S. dollar. As de-dollarization gains momentum, an increasing number of countries are dumping the greenback in their trade settlements. Member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations are in talks to abandon the use of the dollar and euro as main trade currencies. China and Brazil have also signed a deal to conduct trade settlements in their own currencies, and India's new foreign trade policy allows international trade settlement in the Indian rupee. Asia political risk analyst Ross Feingold believes the fund may encourage trade facilitation between the countries.
I actually think one takeaway from this, and Prime Minister Anwar mentioned this, he first proposed this idea over 25 years ago when he was finance minister, earlier stage of his political career. So it shows how difficult it is to actually implement this. Clearly, there's momentum to do some of this. There's clearly momentum between China and some of its major trading partners to do some of their bilateral trade in currencies other than the U.S. dollar. There was a recent agreement between China and Brazil, for example. It's a little easier to facilitate this when state-owned companies are involved and the transactions might be very large transactions in the resources trade, where one sale of a tanker of oil is a very large amount of money. And it's easier to facilitate this if this monetary fund idea really does proceed into serious negotiations. Again, I would expect the United States to try and persuade some countries not to join. And they might have some success. Maybe a Japan or a South Korea, which are very close to the United States, won't join. But countries like Thailand or Indonesia, Malaysia, perhaps Singapore, they might very well join.
So you heard that. Now let's hear something else, okay?
G7 foreign ministers are meeting in Japan as we speak. And they're making dramatic statements. They're issuing threats. They say Russia will be slapped with more sanctions and countries that help Russia will face consequences. But it all sounds hollow when you look at how Russia is faring. It has found ways to bypass sanctions. Russia has proved that it doesn't need the West to trade. Let me tell you about Moscow's latest win. This came in Bangladesh. Dhaka wants to do business with Moscow, and they're ready to pay Moscow in the Chinese yuan. So Bangladesh will make payments to Russia in the Chinese currency. They've bypassed the dollar. And we're talking about a major payment here, worth some $300 million. It will be denominated in the yuan. Do you know what this payment is for? A nuclear power plant. Russia is building a power plant for Bangladesh. It is located near the capital city of Dhaka. The project is worth around $12 billion. It is being financed through a Russian loan. And Bangladesh has 28 years to repay this loan. Right now, it is returning a part of the loan. That's $300 million. Dhaka was supposed to make the payment earlier, but Western sanctions delayed it. You see, Russia has been cut off from the global banking system. So they started looking for alternatives. First, Russia wanted the payment in rubles. It was hesitant to accept the yuan. It feared losses after currency conversion. But Dhaka refused to accept this arrangement, so there was a deadlock. It lasted for over a year. Now it seems Russia has changed its mind. It is ready to accept the Chinese yuan, and Bangladesh is happy to pay in the yuan. But why does Bangladesh prefer the yuan? For multiple reasons. For starters, yuan is one of the official currencies of Bangladesh. Since 2017, Dhaka has been adding the yuan to its currency reserves. But when compared with the dollar, the share of the yuan is minor. In 2017, just 1% of Bangladesh's reserves were in yuan. In August last year, this went up to 1.32%. What about the US dollar? Its share has declined over time. In 2017, 81% of Bangladesh's reserves were in the greenback, 81%. In 2022, this went down to 75%. So while the shift is minor, it is still significant. Dhaka has started to like the yuan. In September last year, the Bangladesh Bank issued orders. This is the Central Bank of Bangladesh. It issued instructions for all commercial banks in the country. It said they could maintain accounts in the yuan, also settle cross-border transactions in the Chinese currency. Last month, Dhaka made another move. The focus this time was on the exporters. They were allowed to hold some of their proceeds in the yuan. This is de-dollarization in action. Bangladesh is just the latest case study. In recent months, many countries have dumped the dollar. In the month of March, for instance, Brazil abandoned the greenback. China and Brazil are using their national currencies to trade now. Recently, Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, gave a speech. He openly criticized the hegemony of the US currency. Now, Lula wants the BRICS to come up with its own currency. BRICS, as you would know, is a grouping of leading emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are the members. And Russia, too, is pushing the BRICS. It wants the group to challenge the US dollar. Now, Bangladesh's move may give this push a new momentum. It only confirms what the world already knows, that Russia is not a pariah state. It has a place in the global economy, and it remains an important player. The West may not want to do business with Russia, but there are other countries who do. And they're coming up with alternative ways to settle trade deals. India, too, is in this mix. India wants to deepen trade ties with Russia. The Russian trade minister was in Delhi yesterday, and he said Moscow and New Delhi are discussing a trade deal, a free trade agreement. It could be in the works. India is a key buyer of Russian oil. It also buys key defense supplies from Russia. And this is likely to continue. Then what is the need for a trade deal now? Well, Russia is interested in buying several Indian goods. Reports say their wish list includes more than 500 products from India. So a Russia-India trade deal will make these purchases easier. It will also accelerate the pivot away from the US dollar.
You see, it's gaining steam, and that's not even it. Even as China and India bump heads, and even as China and India have their differences, and India takes it to a whole nother level with it. I think it's a lot of animosity there for them losing the war in the 60s with China, and how China, pretty much the same amount of people ascended so quickly, and they have implemented things that alleviated 850 million people from poverty to the middle class. They have industrialized China. They have become pretty much the number one economic engine, and I believe that kind of doesn't sit well with India, because at the time of the war, India was perceived to be more advanced and more positioned to rise. But China, with its work ethic, overtook them and continued. So even with those differences, here's something that comes up. You know how they say China continues to buy Russian oil. And you say India continues to buy Russian oil. As a matter of fact, outside of America, India is the number one purchaser of Russian oil. But guess what? According to multiple reports, India is reportedly planning to buy, and they have confirmed this, Russian oil at discounted prices, and even using the Chinese yuan for purchases. There are multiple Indian companies that are buying Russian products using the yuan. Now, here's the kicker. For the first time in history, the Chinese yuan has overtaken the dollar in Russian reserves. That's something, huh? In this trade thing. Now check this out. Russia was given the ability to issue Chinese yuan denominated bonds to fund projects. This used to be an exclusive right of the euro and the dollar. Even Britain is a yuan, I would say, storehouse, because they now have a trading house for yuan. Do you see the domino effect? As a matter of fact, what it says right here on Business Insider, it says that India's top cement producer is paying for Russian coal using yuan. So, and on this one, and I just Googled this, okay? And so it says here, as the top trading partner of more than 120 countries around the world and the global manufacturing hub, the Chinese economy supports the yuan as it wins recognition of more countries across the world. You see, so think about if they are the largest trade partner to 120 countries, at least, because this was written in March. And so some of the data may be behind. But if China, let's just go with 120. What if that 120 get off of the dollar? This drastically dries up the pool where America can print up infinitum and fund this and fund that and export inflation here and export inflation there. That means inflation will start coming home. And that means that you have no say in 120 countries plus China, 121 countries, internal, which is their domestic affairs, or their foreign affairs. This excludes you, and you don't get a middleman cut. Because these are state-to-state purchases and state-to-state trades outside of the dollar, outside of the British pound, outside of the yuan, outside of the yen, outside of the euro. This will be done in yuan. And you see why America is so hell-bent on waging war against China. This is the real reason. So we're looking at that. But let's go a little further, okay? All right? With that said, we see what's going on in Africa. I want you to hear this too. I want to get you acclimated with the real geopolitical, economic, and political atmosphere that is pervasive across the globe. Okay? I don't want you to be dumbed down by what alternative, quote unquote, alternative media gets you and mainstream media gives you. I want you to have the tools to see and hear for yourself so that you can make a decision and on the matters that matter to you most, so that you can protect yourself and your family. Okay? This is what matters. So we're empowering you with a lot of knowledge so that you can make these decisions and you can come to a educated conclusion. So listen to this. It's not just Malaysia. It's not just India. It's not just Bangladesh.
As we can see, Washington is trying to make its presence felt in this conflict to show that there was a time when all roads to peace went through Washington. But over the years, America's so-called rules meant that the United States put itself above all others. It now stands that Africa appears to have given up on the virtues of America's so-called honest peacemaking. And in the case of Sudan, it seems like the intention goes beyond what we know and what we are seeing. In 2021, the coup drew a sharp response from Sudan's Western backers, with the US, the EU, and the World Bank suspending billions of dollars worth of aid and debt forgiveness. The US administration at that particular time, however, kept talking with the coup leaders about restoration of what they call a credible civilian government.
The civilian-led transitional government should be immediately restored. It represents the will of the Sudanese people, as evidenced by the significant, peaceful demonstrations of support on October 21st.
Now, Americans have been told that if they do not dominate, the world will descend into chaos, when in reality, as mediation from different states have shown, other powers are likely to step up to shoulder the burden of security and peacemaking. Not so long ago, the word demands from an immediate end to all fighting in Sudan, and that was to ensure that delayed elections are held peacefully and freely. But the Sudanese leader promised to hold those elections.
We affirm the complete withdrawal of the military from the political process. This step should be accompanied by the withdrawal of political forces from the transitional period as a response to the revolutionaries' demands.
What we do know so far is that many wars that the US has waged and participated in have not only left the countries in positions of failed states, but have also caused increased regional instability. Many say that the US has left countless trails of bloods and turmoil around the world, all in the name of democracy. Many have also said that the West is guilty of crimes which recently it has accused states like Russia of committing. And when it comes to Russia, not only has the West gone too far, but it's also led to warnings that prevent Russia from establishing a naval base off its Red Sea coast, saying that it would harm the country's interests.
All countries have a sovereign right to decide which other countries to partner with. But these choices have consequences, of course.
West most of the time trying to go there just for tourism and just to get the wealth of them without giving them any reward or anything as against or a compensation for that. They demolished the ecology and the climate and the natural resources in Africa, but they didn't give anything to them.
Now, the biggest source of concern for the US administration, and possibly the reason it was first to call a ceasefire, is Sudan's part in China's initiatives. China's role is improved by many other African countries, which see China as an alternative to the US or pursue a hedging strategy between the two to maximize their own interests. This now allows China to carve out a sphere in the region and challenge challenge the US influence. Noluvuyo Kunge, RT, Johannesburg, South Africa.
So you see what's going on, right? The whole world is up in arms and rebelling against the Western world. They're rebelling against Western domination, Western economic domination, Western political domination, Western military domination, and Western cultural domination. They want to live their lives free of domination. This is not an inherent right just for the West. When you're born into God's creation, this is a right that is supposed to be for everyone. To be able to live free, to be able to breathe freely without being exploited, threatened, or killed because of your opposition to unruly and unrighteous and unjust policies and dictates by unreasonable and unrighteous governments and leaders. This is bringing us to the brink. I'm telling you. Now, you see that Africa is rebelling. You see that that the Middle East is rebelling. As a matter of fact, I wanted to play something, but I'm gonna wait and play that. I want to go to something because I see a map here, okay? And this map here, I brought this map up. I'm not gonna put it on the screen. I brought this map up for a reason. Matter of fact, no, I won't put it up. I'll just talk to you about it. This map of the Red Sea. It goes from the Persian Gulf around to the Red Sea, okay? Now, the nations that border this, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Sudan, Egypt, Yemen, and Arabia. These 7 nations, okay? 7 nations. Now, America has military bases in Arabia, Djibouti, Yemen, Somalia. She wants to prevent Russia from having a base in Sudan, right? And America tries to dominate Egypt. So Sudan, America has no base there. No base that we know of. Egypt, America has no base that we know of, right? So these in Eritrea, right? We see Eritrea. And in Eritrea, we don't know, okay? So roughly 3 nations probably don't have U.S. bases. Now, here's the kicker. The uproar that was caused in Sudan, right, was to try to keep Russia from establishing a military base on the Red Sea. Why is that important for the United States? It's because China has a base right about less than a few miles away from a U.S. base in Djibouti. Now, America, when the government of Djibouti allowed China to establish a naval facility, a military base there, America was up in arms, even though the French and all of her colleagues have military bases in Djibouti. But it was unacceptable for China to establish a base in Djibouti. So guess what America had to do? She had to foment war and unrest in Somalia so that she can justify her presence there, quote unquote, fighting terrorists, so that she can establish military operation centers there on the entrance of the Red Sea. Now, check this out. Check this out. I'm telling you what's going on. If you don't think America is setting the world ablaze, and if you don't believe that America is fighting for total hegemony, on the opposite side of the entrance to the Red Sea, there's a nation called Yemen. This nation has little islands that transit the Red Sea. America, Great Britain, and Israel are occupying a strategic island there against the will of the Houthis and the will of the Yemeni people. And also on the main part of Yemen, America, Great Britain, and Israel have military structures that are around the strategic oil and gas areas and the minerally rich areas that pump the oil, the wheat and the rice and the corn. Now you tell me what is going on. And if you look at it, Egypt controls the passages from through the Red Sea on up into the Mediterranean. America is keen on trying to cower Egypt and dictate to Egypt. That is why she is fomenting strife in Somalia, That is why she's causing trouble in Eritrea now. That's why she's starting color revolutions or coups in Sudan. That is why she's occupying Yemeni islands and Yemeni strategic areas. And that is one reason why she will not leave Arabia. Now, I want you to understand how offensive this is to a lot of people, because we don't get this in our mind while I'm talking about this. Let me bring this up. Now, for Christians, oh man, let me see. For Christians, okay, what if Saudi Arabia had a base at the Vatican? How would you feel about that? And what if Saudi Arabia dictated what the Vatican did and could not do? How would you feel about that? Because in Western Christianity, Rome sits as the head, the Vatican sits as the head of Catholicism, right? Now check this out. America has one of her biggest military bases in the region, 20 miles from Mecca or Medina, the two holiest cities in Islam. There's three super holy sites. That's Jerusalem, that's Mecca, that's Medina. America has military bases not even 40 miles away from those areas. But the West doesn't seem to care that it's offensive to those people in the Middle East. This is what I'm saying. The hypocrisy, the arrogance, the hubris. This cannot go on in perpetuity. It cannot. Nobody speaks to these things. Nobody gives you these examples. Nobody gives you these analogies to make you see what is real, and not to give you this foolishness to just to please your soul. No, we got to get out of that. We've got to talk to each other like men and women. We've got to be straight up with each other. That's the problem with the world today. Everybody wants some feel-good stuff. Nobody wants the hard truth. But the hard truth is the only way to get out of the problems that you're in. Okay? Because if you continue to dig in the ground, guess what's going to happen? And you're in this hole and you can continue to dig, guess what happens? The hole gets deeper, you get tighter, and before you know it, you're buried in the very hole that you dug, right? Is that not true? Man, I'm telling you, this is crazy. The world is collapsing and you don't even realize it. And listen, and she's doing this all because she's losing out. I want you to listen to this right here, okay? This is about 8-9 minutes. This is part of the clip that I wanted to play for you the other day. I cut it in half, but the second half, they wouldn't let me upload. So I want you to see this part about the declining dollar, okay? This is by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. This is on the same line of what we're talking about. So when we're talking about the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean and these strategic military bases, these are on strategic waterways, trade areas, transit areas for oil and gas and food and stuff. This is to hold the barrel of a gun to the head of nations. This is why America has so many aircraft carrier groups out there. This is why she has so many naval facilities on these nations' shores. She is holding the barrel of a gun to the nations around the world, trying to force them into dollar suicide. If you don't take my dollar, I'm going to kill you. And if you do take my dollar, maybe you'll die a little slower, but hey, I'll get the benefit out of it. I want you to listen closely to this.
A lot of investors are expressing hope that if there is a recession, that it'll be a mild one. And the argument they make is that following 2008, all sorts of brilliant reforms were introduced to improve the banking system. And as a result, the banking system is more resilient. And I mean, I guess, do you think that if there's a recession, there's going to be a mild one? And do you think that we've largely passed the sort of turmoil following SVB, or is this just the calm before the storm?
I think it's just excuses that they're making for the fact that they repealed the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999, I think it was. The Glass-Steagall Act separates commercial from investment banking. When you repeal it, you let commercial banks become investment banks, and they then use the depositors' deposits for speculation, whereas investment banks use their partners' capital It was their own money they were gambling with. But the repeal of Glass-Steagall lets what were commercial banks, the big banks like Chase Manhattan or JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, it lets these banks in the United States, the foreign ones that operate in the United States, they can use the depositors' money to speculate. Well, this is what gave us the crisis in 2007 and 8. Well, they responded to that crisis. They claimed they did, but they didn't. What they responded to was the American people's feelings that they were bailing out the banks with taxpayers' money. And so they passed Frank Dodd. And when they talk about the legislation that has given stability back to the banking system, they're talking about Frank Dodd, but it doesn't give stability back. What Frank Dodd does, it lets the banks seize deposits of the depositors to bail themselves out. In other words, it gives the depositor another reason to pull his money out of the bank.
Yeah.
So Frank Dodd is a great source of instability. It simply says, okay, the taxpayer doesn't have to bail out the bank. The bank can bail itself out by seizing the deposits of its depositors. Well, that's just another reason for the depositors to fear a troubled bank and to pull its money out. So this is a serious situation. It has not been addressed. The only thing that can restore stability to the banking system is to reestablish Glass-Steagall. For 66 years, it prevented any banking instability. The minute they take it out, boom. And now we may be on the edge of another trouble like that. So no, I don't believe a word of that. And if there's a recession, it's not likely to be mild. Why? Because the American consumers are heavily in debt. They live on credit cards. So when they said recently that the consumer was spending a lot, and what was the other argument? But anyhow, the consumer's spending on credit.
Yeah.
And if the banks are finding pressure because people are withdrawing their deposits, either to get higher interest rate for money market funds or because they're concerned about the illiquidity of the banks, or they're concerned about Frank Dodd and the banks getting in trouble and seizing their deposits, the banks haven't the money to support the credit that the people are living on. Well, Americans, most of them are hand to mouth. I mean, even people with high incomes are living hand to mouth.
Yeah.
Because they spend it all. They have a great big house, the mortgage on their house, the mortgages on their expensive cars, the private schools, whatever. So everyone is living on credit. So if you find unemployment rising, how do you meet your debts? How do you service your debts? And so I think the situation is somewhat serious, and that a recession would, if it happens, would probably be severe.
And all the while, the United States is sanctioning Russia, it's sanctioning China. How does Washington's foreign policy, contribute to this overall economic background?
Well, Washington's policy of sanctions destabilizes the dollar. But I think it increases the stability in the rest of the world. Why? Because it's taught large countries like Russia, China, India, and it's taught Africa and South America that the dollar is a punishment mechanism. And if you don't follow Washington's orders, whoop, you're sanctioned. And so what they're doing, they're dropping the use of dollar to settle their international balances, to settle their trade balances. They're starting to settle their trade balances in their own currencies. So the demand for dollars in international transactions is falling. Supply of dollars isn't. Washington is running massive trade deficits, massive budget deficits. This all has to be financed. And so there are more and more dollars coming out. Instruments denominated in dollars, treasury bonds. So when you have the demand for your currency falling because countries are saying, hey, we're not using the dollar, we're trading with each other in our own currencies, or at least the demand for dollars is no longer rising with world trade because they're finding other ways to settle their accounts, but the supply of dollars keeps coming out. This puts pressure on the exchange value of the dollar. Now, if you look at what the United States has done to itself over the last 30 years by offshoring its manufacturing, it's relocated its manufacturing in Asia. When these goods are brought back into the United States to sell, to market to Americans, they come in as imports. So the trade deficit goes up. The trade deficit has to be financed. The way that Washington has always financed it is by printing money. It could print money because the dollar was the world reserve currency and everyone used the dollar for its own international transactions. But if the dollar starts losing this role and fewer countries use it for the international transactions, how's it going to print dollars? How's the Fed going to, or the government going to print dollars to pay its bills if it's not the reserve currency? It's not in universal demand. So what happens? The dollar would poof, go down. That would mean a massive U.S. inflation. It'd be a kind of inflation that results from currency collapse. There's nothing monetary authorities can do about that.
Yeah. See, I've been telling you these things for the longest, but I want to show y'all something, so I'm going to bring it up on the screen, okay? Give me a second. Let me share the screen. All right, share the screen. Okay, Red Sea Coastal. Yeah, this is the one. Share. I want you to see this. It's coming up. Let me get this off the screen 1 second. They got a little ad up here. Let me move it. All right. Here we go. So, if one were to look here, here on your screen, look at the nations up here. As I told you, we have in the yellowish green, Egypt. We have the orange, the Sudan. We have the kind of pink or pinkish, that's Eritrea. We have the purple, that's Djibouti. We have the pink, that's Somalia. On the other side, on the opposite side, to your far right, we have that white and that blue, that is Yemen. The light blue, that is Arabia. So what we have here is a major geostrategic, geopolitical move by the United States. Again, America occupies Saudi Arabia. America occupies Yemen and is fomenting strife and war there. Rashid, I see you come in. I see you. And it's coming in. You coming in as we're about to close out shortly. But it says Somalia. America is occupying Somalia. America is starting trouble in Eritrea. She has a base in Djibouti. She's starting to foment problems in the Sudan, and she tries to control the government in Egypt. These are, look at the waterway from the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz to the Persian Gulf, from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Aden, and then to the Red Sea and up into the Mediterranean. She is trying to put military centers everywhere so that she can hold trade and commerce to the barrel of a gun. If you don't accept my dollar, I'll stop trade from coming here. If you don't accept my dollar, then I'll become a pirate, an international pirate, and seize your goods and seize your assets. That is what's going on. Let me bring Rashid in. I know he has something to say on this matter. How's it going today, Rashid?
I'm sorry, brother. What happened to old folks? You sit down come from the job and lay down and you fall asleep.
That's all good, bro. It's all good. Before we go off there, hold on. Before you comment on what I just said, I was asked a question about why don't we have a super chat? If you want to, down at the bottom, it is a Cash App and a buy me a coffee thing. So if that's what you want, that's what it is. I put that up there because I was asked that question. Now, that really doesn't matter one way or the other to me because we're going to still continue to do this. Rashid, what have you to say about this strategic map right here? Right to our, right to this side right here.
He's doing.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Go ahead.
He's doing what he's supposed to do. You know, if people won't submit to the king, the king have permission to come down, crack down on you real hard. He was on the rulership of this world, and if somebody won't obey, then I got to do something to put you in line, don't I? And that's what he's doing. He's putting them in line. He's slapping them down. It shows that the other people need to wake up and get, like you said, they you don't need to play around with getting on over your head. Say, I'll punish you. And that's what that is. He's punishing everybody. And he's trying to put everybody in check. Back in their place. And now everybody sees and want to get off of him. This is when he becomes most dangerous.
Yeah.
Most dangerous.
So we see the meltdown, and I hate for everybody. I'm Rashid. I had to bring you in on this last thing. I have something I have to do. That's why I was trying to get it done. We want to thank everybody in the chat as this thing airs. It was just on our mind this late at night to do this so that we can bring it to you all while it was fresh on the mind. Rashid, I'm glad you got at least a word in, at least a statement in before we go off there. I have to go handle some business. I want to thank each and every one of you all for joining us. Rashid, what say you before we go off there?
Once again, keep your eyes open and your ear there and listen, because we're getting ready to go into a very dangerous time.
On that note, if you love the truth, we love you. But always remember that the true and living God will always love you better, and he's working everything out, and we see it happening right before our eyes. We go out on the same note that we came in, loving people who wants righteousness. Now, before I go out, I want to again say this. I love my son. My son did a beautiful outro for the show, and I gotta play it again. But before I do that, I have to say, Mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. And Khalif, your father loves you more than life. All right, check it out. We out. Peace.